I don't know, God is good to me. He's always, it seems like, I don't know if you have to be a minister to understand this, but it just seems like when God is speaking through his people, he's saying basically the same thing all over the world. Like if God is speaking and saying one thing through one of his leaders, like you can turn on the TV and they're saying something else, and you can turn on something else and they're talking about something else. You can walk into this church, Bishop is talking about it, and it just seemed like that is not a coincidence to me because it's happened so many times where, that chain of events has taken place that I just see it as a God speaking through his people. One of the things that, if you look at all the Sunday school lessons that are coming up, are about leadership. That's what it's talking about. And then Bishop had mentioned leadership a couple of weeks ago, saying we really need to understand leadership. And so, me loving the subject in itself, I took them as word and kind of dived into some things, and I said, I want to be able to convey a little tidbit of something before Q&A every time I come forward, just until he tells me to stop. So one of the things that I found today is two things actually that I found, but I'm going to read one because it's kind of long. But I like this one because it's something that Bishop, as a leader, has been teaching us for a while. If you've been listening to him, you know. If you've been hearing the stuff that he's saying, he really don't drill it like he used to drill it into us. But he's talking about the power over ourselves. We first got to have power over ourselves. He teaches us that frequently. And so one of the things is talking about for a leader, in order to lead, we have to start with ourselves. And I thought it was interesting, so I'm going to read it. It says, as a leader, this is John C. Maxwell. Of course, he is anointed in leadership, and so that's what his main area of focus is. And so he says, as a leader, he frequently gets asked the question, what is his greatest accomplishment, the greatest thing that he's ever seen happen as a leader? Mm-hmm. And after reading a book entitled The Greatest Things, he thought that he would compile his own list of the leader's greatest things. And then he says, the list I'm going to share with you over the next few months, and he goes, because this is like a part of a periodical. It says, I suggest that after I share them with you, you do your own assessment because there's no right or wrong answer. What I'm giving you is my own subjective and personal thinking on leadership. So let's get started with the first one. And I do want to say this, even though I'm reading this, it's informational. It's not that you have to take it word for word, verbatim. You can glean from it. Because I believe everybody's leading somebody. If you're a parent, you're leading your children. If you can be leading people at work, you can be leading people are just probably in your family, depending on you, you're leading them. Whatever the case, somebody is always watching us. You know what I'm saying? So it says the leader's greatest victory is victory over self. It says my greatest victory every day is a victory over self. I don't want to put this in past tense because this is a daily battle that I have to fight. Not a day goes by where I don't have to work on myself and battle the temptations of self. When people think of leadership, the common thought is the leader's greatest victory is with others. That is a normal and understandable thought process because what do leaders do? They lead others. They are taking people someplace, right? I have found that most of my problems in leadership are my problems. It's like the guy who said, if I could kick the person most responsible for my troubles, I wouldn't be able to sit down for a week because I would be kicking myself. So halfway through my book, Leadership Goal, which is a compilation of 26 of the most important lessons that I learned as a leader, I realized I learned almost every lesson because I did it wrong. In other words, the lesson was learned not because I was smart or got it right, but because I messed up. I had to reverse and ask myself some questions like, how did I get that wrong and what could I have done better? When I work with leaders, many of the problems they have with people are their own problems. It reminds me of when I was doing a conference and a college student raised his hand and said to me, John, I love all this leadership information, but I don't have a team yet, so who should I start leading? And my answer to him was start with yourself. Because if you wouldn't follow yourself, why should anyone else? The philosopher Plato said the first and best victory is to conquer self. Ralph Stater, president of Johnsonville Foods, wrote, in most situations, I am the problem. My mentalities, my pictures, my expectations form the biggest obstacles to my success. I think Ralph was feeling what I felt many times. He found the enemy, and it was himself. In my book, Winning with People, there are some people principles that address victory over self. Let's take a look at a couple. The lens principle, who we are determines how we see others. So this principle says once we get our own act together, we will be able to help others get their acts together. It's impossible if I am an unhealthy leader to have healthy followers. I have to fix myself. We don't see others as they are, we see others as we are, because each of us has his or her own bent, and that colors our view of everything. I remember saying to Bishop just recently, I said, I know you trust everybody, Bishop, but I don't. I thought about that when I was reading this, because it's shaped by my own perceptions and everything. So I thought about that, because like I said, I'm learning from this too. So it says, what is around us doesn't determine what we see. What is within us does. For example, if I am an untrusting person, here goes. How do you think I will see you? I will see you as untrustworthy, even though I think I'm a woman of integrity. I am going to view you not as you are, but as I am. I'm going to look at you through the lens of John Maxwell, so anything that is unhealthy about me is going to spill onto you. This is what leaders have to understand. So if somebody's like calling you something, like say somebody's always saying you as manipulative, it's probably because they are. You know what I'm saying? So it says, as a leader, if I can get victory over myself, if I can fix John Maxwell, that's who wrote this, or Rashawn McCoy, the odds are high that I can help fix others. If I can't fix myself, the odds are high I will never be able to add value to and help others. And then he has something called the mirror principle. The first person we must examine is ourselves. It says people unaware of who they are and what they do often damage relationships with others. The way to change that is to look in the mirror. A leader's tendency is to examine someone else, asking what is wrong with that person. Why aren't they doing their job correctly? Why don't they ever come to work on time? Unfortunately, this is how many leaders react. It's easy to teach leadership. It's difficult to model leadership. Within the first 6 months of becoming a pastor, I came up against a real issue that I had to settle within my heart. It centered on the question, how do I teach my congregation a biblical passage I wasn't living correctly or falling short of myself? What was I going to do with that teaching session? I grew up in a culture that would say just fake it until you make it and just tell them how to live and move on. But I was uncomfortable with that. I remember sitting down with my wife and discussing this with her, and I made a determination early on as a young pastor that I would never teach what I didn't live. I went on to my congregation and I told them I was very young and inexperienced, and there may be times when I bring in other pastors to teach certain principles, and if that happens, I will come and sit with them in the pews and take notes alongside them. I have tried my whole life to live that principle of not trying to export something I don't possess. That's why victory over self is so essential for the leader. And then he's talking about an author named Terry Felber in his book, Am I Making Myself Clear? He said the following: there's something innate in us that looks out for our own interests before those of others. If I take a photograph of a group you are with, who is the first person you look for in the picture? Yourself, of course. You'll think to yourself, look at my hair, it's all messed up, and my eyes are half closed. But that's a pretty smile on my face. The most important person to you is yourself. A key difference between followers and leaders is very simple. Followers think of themselves first. Leaders think of others first. Putting others before yourself is a key victory for a leader. And now it's time for that. John C. Maxwell. You still got the book, right? Yeah, that book I gave. You still have it for real? I got it. Because Ernest said, I'm not half bishop for that book. I said, he better not give it to you. Okay. I was just thinking about that. It's the first person. It really goes back to what Bishop teaches, the power over myself. If I don't have power over myself, I will always go back to that conversation that he had with that pastor who said, I can go do whatever I want to do. He was going out and doing things that were ungodly. And he said, and I will always come back to the pulpit to preach because that is my gift. And then Bishop told him, no, because your first call is holiness, and that's, the power over yourself. You got to have first power. Well, that's what Bishop calls the first power. That's what we learned it to be. It's a power over ourselves. That means I may want to do something or react a certain way, but sometimes I don't just for the sake of other people. And that happens a lot to me. I want to react a certain way, but I don't for the sake of other people. Not only for the sake of other people, because the way I want to feel when I do, react that way, and then there's sometimes that I look back on and I feel ashamed that I act that way. You know what I'm saying? So we learn from our mistakes. As leaders,